the currency of assessment, the way that we actually write out what we want our students to accomplish so we have these benchmarks against which to compare, is called the student learning outcome, the SLO. It's probably an abbreviation you've heard before. And these are learning outcomes. They're statements about what a learner is actually expected to be able to do after having gone through a learning opportunity. And there are three criteria that we need to keep in mind when we're writing an SLO. These SLOs need to be very specific. We need to have them be measurable in some way. We need to be able to observe something that the student does so we can actually measure against that. And lastly, they need to be the result of actual learning. And you'll see what I mean by that here on the next slide. If we look at this list of example SLOs here, this is a table where we're going to try and think about whether or not these are good SLOs. And we have our three criteria, whether or not this is specific, whether it's measurable, and whether it results from learning. And only after you've gone through those first three checks can you get in the last column here, is this a good SLO, and check that off. So let's take a look at the first one. Students will arrive on time. It's pretty specific. You know exactly what you want your students to do. It's very easy to measure. You just need a clock. But does it really result from your learning design? In this particular case, we would probably not call this a good SLO because it has nothing to do with learning. The next one, students will appreciate the benefits of exercise, is also pretty specific. We know what our students want to achieve, but we run into a problem with that word appreciate. How do you measure appreciation? How can you tell whether somebody appreciates something or not? And it's really hard to do, so this particular SLO is not measurable, so we would probably not call this a really great SLO. If you wanted to come up with a slightly better version about exercise, number 4 here, we'll be able to explain how exercise affects stress. Well, that's pretty specific. We can come up with some sort of rubric for measuring how well they explained that connection. And this is most definitely a result from learning. We maybe created a great activity that talked about the relationship between stress and exercise. So overall, number 4 here, we'd call a good SLO. So you might want to pause the video, look through all of these, and try and fill out this checklist yourself. After you've looked at all these SLOs, you start realizing that the key to dissecting them is really in the verbs: arrive, appreciate, demonstrate, explain, have, resolve, assist, understand. And trying to figure out whether or not you've written a good SLO means trying to figure out whether you've chosen a good verb. We said appreciate was a verb that really wasn't measurable, but explain, we can actually measure the quality of explanations. So other people that study education have really thought a lot about how to describe these activities with verbs, and this is something called Bloom's taxonomy, and it really categorizes different performance actions that reflect different levels of cognitive ability, from lower order thinking up to higher order thinking. At the bottom here we have this foundation of remembering. And how does somebody express whether or not they've remembered something? Well, they're able to define things, they're able to list things, they're able to repeat or recall them. A little bit more sophisticated, more complicated is understanding something. How do you tell if somebody's understood something? Well, they're able to describe it, they're able to explain it, they're able to identify things, recognize things, paraphrase. All the way up to the top of the pyramid here, we have this category called creating, which is really reflecting higher order thinking skills. And how do people express that? Well, creating is a pretty active verb as it is. It's pretty measurable, but you can actually check to see whether or not people can create things, design them, or even just writing assignments. Open writing assignments can be a very expressive creation activity. So I like to categorize these levels of thinking skills they're categorized from sort of lower order to higher order thinking in my own way. I put at the bottom of the pyramid here the factoid recall and explanation recall up to applying to some simple problems, and then all the way up at the top, really sophisticated project planning and execution. And so when you're designing a course, you want to sort of make sure that you've laid the foundation, that you have some activities that help your students with these lower order thinking skills, make sure that they have the basics, the foundations, and then build up to testing whether or not they've really understood those by having them work on some simple problems. And then at the end, you design an activity that really allows them to express that with a great culminating project. In a lot of ways, the reason that we have this drawn as a triangle is we have a lot more activities down at the lower level with remembering, understanding, and fewer activities at the top, because you need to build that foundation in your course before you really start having students doing really sophisticated projects. Let's say you've put a lot of thought and effort into writing SLOs, maybe for your traditional course. Well, what sort of changes do you need to make for your hybrid or online course when you start using technology to deliver the content? And the answer is pretty simple. You really don't need to make many changes, and that's because all the principles of good course design, they apply in a face-to-face setting just as well as they do in any other online or technology-assisted setting. So once you've written the SLOs, you've come up with a finish line. You've defined what the finish line is going to look like. And so now you're really ready to design your training regimen, the one that's going to help you get there. And if you're designing a sprint versus a marathon, you're going to want to create very different learning activities along the way. And that's going to be the focus of our next section.